From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kim Strassel here on Potomac Watch. Kevin McCarthy, GOP House leader, struggling to get the votes to become Speaker of the House, despite the fact that Republicans won the majority in the House. They now have a 222 to 213, or will have that level of majority in the next Congress. That happens to be the mirror image of Nancy Pelosi's Democratic majority this year. So it's a narrow majority, but clearly, as Pelosi showed, you can govern with it if you can keep enough unanimity. But right off the bat here, 5 or 6 House members, if not more, are saying, we're not going to vote for Kevin McCarthy. And of course, you need on the floor of the House in January to become Speaker a majority of those who are voting in attendance. Now, you can have certain people who say they are not voting. You can have others who say that they are just voting present. But you need a majority of those who are voting to be able to become Speaker. And the risk is that could you toss the speakership to a Democrat if Republicans can't rally around McCarthy? Let's listen to Don Bacon, who's a McCarthy supporter and a member of Congress, talk about what's going on.
Just to say no without an alternative after 85% of the Republicans have selected Kevin, and right now I guarantee you, Trey, it's about 95% are with him. I've been a commander 5 times in the Air Force. I deployed 4 times. Teams win. And when a small number of people go against the team and breaks down the team, that's how you get beat. And by doing what they're doing, they're helping out Chuck Schumer, they're helping out Joe Biden, and they're helping out Hakeem Jeffries with these actions.
Kim, sounds to me like Congressman Bacon is essentially right here. What's the beef with Kevin McCarthy?
Yeah, and I give Bacon some credit. He's been pretty fiery on this because a lot of the press has just been sucked up by the handful of people that are opposing McCarthy. And Bacon is, along with a crew of folks, is warning them to step back. The issue here, Paul, is, as he said, we already had a vote. Somebody did oppose McCarthy internally in the conference. This was not the entire House vote, but just a Republican vote. Andy Biggs stood up against him. He only got 31 votes. And normally what happens in that situation is the winner wins and everyone coalesces around them. Instead, Biggs is not giving up. He's been joined by Matt Gaetz of Florida, Congressman Good from Virginia, Ralph Norman from South Carolina. Enough of them that, at the moment at least, McCarthy does not have those 218 votes, at least from Republicans. They've been unclear what they want, other than that they don't want him. Some of them on the margins are angling for changes in the way that the rules work. They want more positions on the Rules Committee, which is a very influential committee, for instance, or they want changes that allow for more legislative freedom in terms of what the members can do versus leadership. And McCarthy's meeting with different people to see if he can get there. But on the broad question, these sort of stuck 4 or 5 Republicans who say no, they're not actually making a demand of him. They just say they want someone else. And the problem at the moment, Paul, is that there isn't somebody else, which could lead to a lot of confusion and multiple ballots on the day if these folks don't come around.
Well, Andy Biggs, the Arizona congressman who ran in the Republican conference and lost resoundingly. I mean, he only got 30-some votes. He's saying now he will run for Speaker on the floor, which I guess you can do if you can get a nomination and a second. Could this possibly end up with a divided Republican conference and Hakeem Jeffries with a united Democratic conference winning the speakership? I mean, it's hard to imagine that they would be that stupid. But again, these are Republicans. They're fully capable.
They are. I think that that's the least likely scenario, although here are a couple of scenarios that I am hearing, okay? One is that McCarthy goes down to the floor that day. There are multiple ballots and he can't get across 218. And the party decides to rally around somebody that's an alternative to him, but is still quite a strong conservative. The name that keeps coming up is Steve Scalise, who is his second-in-chief at the moment. Interestingly, Scalise was asked about this. He said that he was supporting McCarthy, but did not rule out the possibility that he would take that position if that were to happen. Another name you have heard is Jim Jordan, who obviously is part of the Freedom Caucus. Interestingly, he did rule it out. He said, I will not run for Speaker. I want to be the head of the House Judiciary Committee, which is what he is slated to be. Another scenario is that you could get get some moderate Republicans and go work with moderate Democrats to come up with a more moderate Republican leader. Now, guys like Don Bacon have been throwing that out there, I think, is a way to kind of threaten and warn these holdouts that this is what could happen if they don't get it together. Some of the names you hear there are like Brian Fitzpatrick. He's a Republican from Pennsylvania. He's the Republican head of the Problem Solvers Caucus. John Katko from New York, who was someone who voted to impeach Donald Trump twice. Or Tom Cole, who's a very powerful long-term legislator on the Rules Committee. Those names seem more likely than maybe Hakeem Jeffries getting the gavel. But, to even get that moderate situation, Paul, you'd end up needing every Democrat plus 5 Republicans to do that, which is also a tough call.
It is a tough call, and then you're left with a problem of how do you govern? I mean, it's one thing you may be able to win the speaker's vote, but then how do you cajole the Republican conference to be a coherent majority and deliver any kind of legislation? Be very, very hard to do because you'd have a faction that is sore about what happened, and you only need 5 or 6 of them to vote against you on any given issue, and you turn the floor over to the minority party, to the Democrats. So the Don Bacon strategy, I understand why he's saber-rattling there, but that strategy is fraught. The simple question is, why can't Republicans get together and put together a majority knowing the reality of 218? You can't do anything without 218 or 214 if, some people are sick or something, but without a majority plus 1. That is the reality of the House of Representatives. That is the reality of any legislature. And, particularly having witnessed Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats use their narrow majority to pass an enormous amount of legislation. Why can't they learn that lesson? Now, granted, Pelosi had a president who was setting an agenda, and Democrats are loath to go against the president. It's a little harder when all you control is the House. But if you're the only barrier, the only obstacle to the White House agenda, to the Democratic Senate agenda, if you're the only obstacle to spending even more money, another $3 or $4 trillion or whatever Biden would like to spend, you have to be able to be coherent and be able to provide the votes to offer an alternative point of view. And if you can't do that, in 2 years, I suspect the voters are going to say, these clowns, what have they done for us? Who cares if they win again? I think that's the real peril for Republicans.
Yeah, and the pity of that is it won't be all Republicans. It'll be about 5 knuckleheads that won't get their act together. I mean, this is the thing is, the right likes to laugh at and lampoon some of the crazies on the Democratic side, like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. But I'll tell you what, she was there voting with the Democrats when they needed it. And, there might have been some negotiations and Pelosi had to get tough, but in the end, she dragged her conference over the line. These kind of holdouts, now we'll see. It's really close at the moment, Paul. So if McCarthy can just get 1 or 2 of these guys in the end to say yes, he'll have the votes he needs. And then the holdouts will be kind of isolated, as it were. And by the way, they won't have a lot of goodwill. There are a lot of people who are very furious about this at the moment, and that means about 95% of the caucus. But this is also the reality of this election, and I would just say, and Republicans' mistakes in not having a better message, in not getting themselves right on the abortion question more quickly after the Supreme Court issued their Dobbs decision, because while, yes, they won the House, this majority is so narrow that it was almost going to be guaranteed that McCarthy had these kind of headaches. That's why he himself had been out there gunning for, a 20-seat majority, and doesn't he wish now?
Well, and there's a real question of governance here as McCarthy tries to negotiate for the votes, because if he has to give up much of his power as Speaker in order to become Speaker, the question is, will he be able to do the job well, which requires a certain amount of discipline. And if you give up so much power that you don't wield enough of it, you're building in your chances for failure.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, because let's be clear, McCarthy has already done a number of things that these Republicans wanted him to do. He's created a new select committee on China. He is booting some Democrats off committees the way that Nancy Pelosi had done to Republicans. He is ramping up the degree to which they're going to do investigations. By the way, something I'm not sure is even a great idea, but that was a demand of these folks. He's also expanded the steering committee, which is this kind of powerful group that decides who sits at different committees, et cetera, and to give more of the rank and file a say in that process. But some of the things that they want him to do, as you said, could completely completely debilitate his ability to do his job. One thing that they want is the ability for any single member to be able to call for a vote for the oustership of the speaker on the floor. That could lead to a lot of chaos. Anytime someone's having a bad day, you just go down and, have another kind of confidence motion in the speaker. That would also be very corrosive to his authority and ability to get things done. So I can see why he's holding out on that. And the reality is he's negotiated. And I think it's now time for these guys to take what they've got and move on.
All right, Kim, we'll see if they take your wise counsel. The Republicans need to get their act together in the House, or they're going to dissipate their power before it even begins. All right, thanks, Kim. Thank you all for listening. And don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. Of course, we're here every day on Potomac Watch, so thanks for listening, and we hope you're with us tomorrow and the rest of the week.